Welcome to B&W Insights. I am your host, Mark Siefert, and today we take it back to where it all started. We're going to recap how much has changed in the world of lead over the past year. From federal regulations to specific states, what communities are doing, what do we see happening in the future? We have our guest, Kaitlin Wright, who's the Baxter Woodman expert in lead, to talk to us today. Ready? Let's get started. Kaitlin, thank you for joining us today. And like I mentioned, really excited to have you back. This was the first episode. Now looking back over what's happened in the field of lead over the past year, especially what's happening with communities, what you're seeing out there in the field. So thank you for coming down.
Thanks for having me, Mark. I'm really happy to be back.
So how did you become the Baxter Woodman expert in lead? I know we talked a little about it in the last episode, but for the new listeners, how did you start working on lead and become just so ingrained in the regulations and following all the trends and really becoming an expert in this field?
So I feel like I've got a little bit of a unique perspective. I've been in the industry 12 years now. I've worn a lot of different hats in the industry, whether out in construction, in design, doing some operational related things. So I'm really invested in communities and what they're facing. But on the flip side, I live in a house that's 100 years old. I have a lead service line, so I really am kind of understanding that private property owner perspective on this. And so I can bring both perspectives to the table and enjoy kind of being able to bring that to a community and maybe the things that they're not thinking about there.
So at Baxter Woodman, we serve Illinois, Wisconsin, Florida, Texas, and we have people from all over the country who listen to the podcast. Why are lead service lines still urgent in 2026? And, we hear it in the news last week when, we heard the federal government pulled out $125 million from a $1 billion pool of money. And we're hearing about more and more communities. We're getting calls weekly. So why is this just remaining urgent and now that we're really pushing it forward?
So I think there's two things. First and foremost, it's still a health issue. This is not some historical thing. It's still a health issue today. It's going to be a health issue tomorrow. So we still have that risk of exposure for our children, for pregnant women. So lead is obviously dangerous in that aspect, and the best way to reduce that risk is to remove it. On the flip side, by delaying and not acting, we're seeing higher construction costs. We're seeing less availability for contractors. So there's this urgency to take action sooner rather than later to make sure that we're actually meeting the regulations in a timely manner.
So we recorded our first episode in August of 2024.
It's wild.
And at that time, it was inventories, replacement plans, talking about the new sampling regulations. February 2026, as we record today, what's the landscape look like today?
So, we've got kind of a different place here. I would say that inventories, replacement plans, and sampling is still critical, maybe less so in Illinois because we've been operating underneath some of these regulations already. More critical for our other states where maybe they haven't started the sampling process. They're still working on their baseline inventory. They haven't developed replacement plans yet. Our big shift now is really looking at those replacements and making sure that we're ready for 2027. A year flew by between our last podcast and now, so I cannot imagine how quickly 2027 is going to be here. I think that's really where the focus needs to be, is being ready to facilitate those and all the different pieces that go into that.
So you've spent, obviously, a lot of time here in Illinois. You've been going to conferences, talking to operator groups. Also, last year, you spent a little bit of time in Florida, went to a water conference down there to specifically listen to their talks on lead. How do you feel different states are approaching the lead conversation, and why do you think that there's a difference? Is it, parts of the country, different construction times, or What is that? What is that difference of how you heard the conversations in different states?
That's a great question. So in Illinois, we had our own state regulation that went into play, and that I think forced communities to start looking at this far sooner than the rest of the country. So we've been planning for this for essentially 2 or 3 years longer than other states. We're seeing where the other states are kind of in the place that we were 2, 3 years ago. That's where they're at today, which is they're more looking at that planning piece and getting geared up. So I would say in terms of what we're seeing in the other states, there's almost a little bit of denial still. Just getting their hands wrapped around what these regulations are going to mean, how they're going to impact operations, how they're going to impact the financial aspects of a community. They're still in a place of figuring that out.
Now, I know when we talked in August of 24, we had asked you, hey, can you predict what's going to happen? And obviously, you took some wild guesses, but what has surprised you about since communities started implementing their replacements? What's something that surprised you that, looking back at 2024, you said, oh, man, I was right about that?
So we'll start with what I feel like I was right on. And we spoke on sampling and kind of what that lift was going to be for communities. And it was a heavy lift for our Illinois communities rather. What I think I really had a miss on was how the other states were going to implement the lead and copper rule revisions, which is the federal law that's in place right now. We had assumed that the rest of the country was going to look to that regulation and incorporate it into their processes.
Right away, we thought.
Yeah. Illinois had adopted it, right? So we were acting underneath that law as well as our Illinois law. What ended up happening was the other states acknowledged the LCRR and required communities to submit an inventory, but they sort of pressed pause on all the other requirements. So the sampling changes, replacement plans, need to facilitate replacements if you had an exceedance with your sampling. That was all put on pause because they knew that the US EPA was releasing the lead and copper rule improvements, which has now been finalized. So a lot of our other states they haven't done all these steps that we are anticipating them to do because their primacy agency wasn't requiring it.
Okay. So since a lot of these states, like you mentioned, are, maybe 2 years from where we were, should we expect over the next 2 years, 3 years that there's going to be a huge ramp up of some of these efforts?
I think we're going to see that timeline shorten significantly. So I don't think it's going to be a 2 year to 2 year. I think they've effectively got a year to get ramped up because 2027 is go. Now it's November 1st of 2027. So I guess
a few extra months.
Yeah, you got, I guess, effectively 3/4 of that year. But it's that thankfully, because we've gone through it here, we can help provide guidance to those other states. We know what to expect and we can get them to the finish line.
So if a utility leader had listened to the first episode and, whether they were in Illinois or Florida, Texas, Wisconsin, and said, this wasn't an issue back then for them, they're checking back in 18 months later. What's that surprise look like for them?
Our regulations are tightening. They are not going away. I think there was sort of this mindset for a while that, well, this isn't going to actually happen. Like, we knew it was out there. And I think that there's still communities that kind of have that mindset. That's not the case. We're seeing the laws get more strict. We're seeing primacy agencies hold communities to those regulations, and there's consequences if you're not following them. And there's becoming less and less tolerance if there's no action being taken. So if you're not familiar with your regulations or you thought this isn't going to impact me, I would highly suggest that you get comfortable with those regulations because even if you don't have lead in town, these regulations will impact you in some way, shape, or form.
Now, we talk about the regulations being updated and there's, you mentioned being more strict and really putting pressure on. Since our last episode, what regulatory changes have happened? Can you, expound on that and spend a couple minutes talking to our listeners about what those regulation changes have been.
Yeah. I could spend an hour on that alone, but so with the release of the lead and copper rule improvements and that getting finalized, that happened a year ago now, essentially. That has completely shifted the landscape for the country. Before, required replacement wasn't going to happen unless you had an issue with your sampling and you had an exceedance. That now has gone away. You have 10 years to replace your lead service lines in town unless you have a high lead service line burden. I won't get into that. The other kind of shifts are there's changes again with sampling. So underneath LCRR, we had changes with sampling. LCRI, lead and copper rule improvements, we've got changes in sampling. One of the biggest changes is our action level goes from 15 parts per billion down to 10 parts per billion. I know a lot of communities that have seen where they're sitting between that 10 to 15 range. If you're seeing that right now in your sampling, yes, it's great. You have not had an exceedance, but know that you've got effectively a year to figure out how to get that below 10 because you're going to have an exceedance. And the requirements around an exceedance are extensive. There's a lot of public notification requirements. You've got to do corrosion control analysis. If you have 3 exceedances within a 5-year period, I believe it is, I'll need to check that, you have to distribute filters to your entire community, not just lead service lines. So there's potentially a lot of operational costs for our community regarding that as well.
So to put it into a term that a lot of people hear when there's a severe storm coming, the time to prepare is gone. It's time to act now.
Yeah.
With all those regulations and all those changes and things happening, most utilities have started submitting their inventories. What are you seeing on the inventories in terms of quality, completeness? Obviously, we're working on infrastructure that's underground.
Yep.
We left our X-ray goggles at home. So some of it's, deductive reasoning and making best guesses and seeing projects in the past. What are you seeing and how are you helping communities who say, I just don't know?
Yeah. It's a wide range. There's communities that have their inventories done, and I would say are 95% accurate. To your point, it's underground. There's certain assumptions that are made, and unless you expose every single service line from water main to into the home, you're never going to have 100% confidence on what that material absolutely is. But on the flip side, we're seeing still a lot of unknowns in systems. We're seeing where communities have made those assumptions, and we're getting out in the field, and they're not accurate. And no fault to them. There's just a certain level of unknown where, like, if you see it inside of the house being, say, copper, that could have been because a plumber came in and did a repair, right? And outside of the foundation wall or slab, you've got lead, and you're not going to know until you dig that thing up.
So, with the inventories, obviously there's going to be gaps. There's going to be spots. So what is the best step of, correcting those gaps and correcting those mistakes? Is it, what are the follow-ups that a community can do?
I think it's internal organization. You have a lot of opportunities in your day-to-day operations to understand what's happening in an inventory. If you're doing meter inspections, you've got someone going into a house, check it. If you've got an emergency water main break, knock on wood, hopefully you don't.
We usually don't use that word in this podcast, but
I know. I just
let you slide one
jinx
time.
things. There's a chance that you're going to come across the service line there. Capture what that is. If you're doing some sort of sewer work and you happen to see a service line, like those are all opportunities to capture inventory information. If you've got a local plumber or local plumbers that they are focused in your community, build relationships there. They could provide you information as well. So there's a lot of different avenues communities can use, assuming that the inventory is one person's responsibility and not kind of broadcasting it throughout your community, throughout your staff, is a shortfall at that point because you're losing kind of all those pinpoints where you could potentially be getting that information.
And obviously, there are some communities who just have unknowns.
Yeah.
How are regulatory agencies reacting when they see a community come in with 70% unknown, 50% unknown? What are you seeing coming back from? I know you have a good working relationship with the IEPA, but I'm sure across the country you've heard. How are those regulatory agencies really coming back at communities with that?
So there's no action being taken against a community for having unknowns right now. And for our other states, they're not submitting to the primacy agency. I mean, they did an initial submittal about a year and a half ago now, but they're not going to be submitting again until November 1st of next year. And so you're not going to have your primacy agency checking in with you on that. But I'll say that unknowns when we get to that November 1st date, the lead and copper oil improvements kind of go date, those get counted as lead.
Right.
You no longer get a grace period. Your state is going to look at it as, I now have 70% of my community as lead, and I am required over the next 10 years to replace it. And they're looking at that count, that number, for what you're doing each year. So going and unearthing it and going, oh, it's actually copper, or oh, it's actually poly, that doesn't count as a replacement. So it does not help you by not determining those unknowns.
And I think that's really important, and I want to stress that is if you put an unknown and you go out there and you dig it up and it's copper, that doesn't count as one of the replacements you have to do.
Yeah.
So there's a potential that the primacy agencies may say, replace it anyways because you need to have so many replacements.
Yeah.
Correct?
I'm not sure how they're going to handle it, but they are not going to look kindly on situations where you've just kind of let your inventory sit and done nothing.
So you've been working with many, many communities on this already. And how many have realistically started full-scale replacements versus just planning? Are there communities saying, we're going to try to get ahead of this? We know we have 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. 10 years is just not financially possible for us. We need 13 years, 14 years. So are there communities who say, we're going to try to spread this out over the 14, 13 years?
Yeah, so there's communities across the country that have started doing replacements now. Some have already finished replacements.
Wow.
So there are communities that took action early. I would say that is a minority of the group. We are starting to see more communities this year start doing replacements, more of maybe like a pilot program. But
they need to know how is the community going to react?
Yeah.
How is the staff going to react? What are the pain points? And maybe some communities who are doing, 50 this year, but they know they need to do 150 next year. Hey, let's find our pain points now before we go full scale. Yeah, and that's I know we've talked in the past week or two. There's just going to be anomalies out there, and unfortunately, the way the law is written, the anomalies aren't really covered. There's the gray area because you're following plumbing code, you're following state regulatory agencies, you're following public health. So, what are some of those, broadly, what are some of those pain points you're seeing for communities who have jumped ahead?
I'm going to say three, and there's so many more than three. But the biggest piece, I would say, is it's always funding, right? If a community does not have clarity at the board or council level on how they're paying for this, are they doing a cost share program? Are they looking for supplemental funding from state or federal agencies? It gets really hard very quickly to do that replacement program because how you're paying for it is literally the bottom dollar. My other piece is we've got individual stakeholders at every single property. So navigating with property owners, getting their buy-in, working around their schedule, making them feel like we are, concerned about the rose bush that maybe they got from, their great grandma or something along those lines. Everyone's different with that. And so you're not working within your right of way anymore. You're not dealing with one contractor and kind of your community. You've got individual stakeholders.
Right.
And my final piece with that is operationally, we're now having to like overlay lead service line replacements with water main replacements, road projects, sidewalk projects. Do you have maybe you're doing something downtown and you're kind of wanting to revamp downtown? Well, you don't want to do that and then replace your lead service line next year.
Right.
That doesn't work out well. So there's a capital improvement planning piece there that really needs to be front and center when we're having these conversations.
So, you're talking about the bottlenecks of the projects, and I really like the fact that you brought up that each individual service is an individual stakeholder.
Yeah.
And you really now are doing it's not a one project with 1,000 lead services, it's 1,000 individual projects.
It is.
And just the management and the communication, not all 1,000 people are going to have the same communication style, the same schedule. So there is a lot of planning that's going into it. So obviously you've taken some strategies here in Illinois of how to replace, whether it be open cut the entire way, boring, small projects, large projects. What are some of those strategies that you've seen that are the clear winners since 2024?
The problem is every project's different, every community is different. So to me, always early coordination with property owners will always go a long way. And when I say early, I mean if you can start coordinating with property owners during design before you've gone out to bid. They need to know that this is coming. Getting that contact information, getting that buy-in, that's really important, and can shift kind of the responsiveness that you're going to see out in construction versus if you're knocking on their door the day that you're wanting to, start digging up their front yard, you're going to have someone that's potentially pretty upset.
Right.
They might have other things going on in their life that they value more than you digging up their front yard. And you're just going to kind of get that general pushback. I would say also it's the internal organization for the community. So this isn't just a utility problem. There's permitting that's involved. There's communications that's involved. Your board and council better know that this project's going on. So if someone's showing up and has a grievance, or maybe they're maybe a celebration, maybe they're thrilled that you're doing this project, they need to have that understanding of what's going on. So internal organization is key. Who all needs to be involved with the project, and even if they're not directly involved, do they understand what's happening? And then early coordination and communication.
So that communication with residents, and it's huge on every project. Obviously, we talked about this is so much more. Are you seeing any pushback from residents or affordability concerns? What's some of that? Because obviously we're working on private property. We're getting into a home. What are some of the biggest concerns you're seeing? And also, how are we overcoming those concerns?
Well, there's still residents who, even if a community is paying 100%, that have kind of the mindset of, I've lived here for 60 years. The service line hasn't been an issue. I don't need you coming into my house, regardless of if you're paying for it or not. So there is still that pushback, and I don't think we're ever going to get around to that. At that point, I think you've got to wait for that house to potentially go on the market. Affordability is definitely an issue for communities doing cost share programs. If you're just looking for that property owner to give you a lump sum cost at time of replacement, unless your community is relatively affluent, we're really not seeing that happen. So communities are having to kind of go back to the drawing board, operate maybe more as a bank, and do like some sort of payment plan on the water bill. Maybe it's a 3-year program where we're effectively giving you a 0% interest loan, homeowner, for you to pay us back for this effort. That seems to go over relatively well with community members, but just asking a homeowner to, shell out $7,000, $8,000 for their service line work, or potentially $15,000 if the community is looking at the entire service line as the private property owner's responsibility. That's a lot of money
For anybody.
Yeah.
We talked a lot about SRF funding and state revolving fund. We talked about getting loans. This perfectly gets us into our next topic is whether you're in Illinois and you are working your planning process, or if you're in Wisconsin, Texas, Florida, If you're not aggressively going after funding now, are you behind?
Short answer is I would say yes. Now, each of these states operate their SRF funding a little bit differently. So I would say in like Florida, they're looking to fund projects quarterly. So you have a little bit more grace period there. Some of our other states, if you have not submitted to them now or maybe in the next few months, yes, yeah, you are behind that 8 ball if you're looking for those funds.
And what type of, in Illinois especially, you're seeing some competition come up of maybe the first year in 2024. Yeah, if you applied, you were getting it for lead service line. But even last year, we saw some communities not getting funded on a low interest loan.
Yeah.
And I mean, do you expect that going into 2027, 2028, 2029, it's going to even get more competitive? So alternative revenue sources are going to have to be starting to get looked at.
Yeah, the competition is fierce. Communities that were basically looking to have their entire program funded through SRF funding, I would strongly recommend viewing that funding source as supplementary to local funds. You can guarantee local funds. You might have to raise rates. You might have to go pull a bond. There might be a different avenue that you have to go to do that, but you can guarantee that if you set it up correctly. Versus that loan program,
there's no guarantee.
You can't. And we're seeing just between fiscal year 25 and fiscal year 26 for IEPA, we saw an increase of twice the ask. So last year, I think the ask was like $262 million. This year was $501 million.
Wow.
I know I've got communities that aren't asking for funds until fiscal year 27. So we know that ask is going to go up.
So we know this is a long process. We've mentioned starting in 27, communities have 10 years. Comparing this to a long race, and I know just from knowing each other, neither of us are runners. So I'm going to say we're going to use the term of a marathon for all the people out there. And I'm sure someone can correct me in the comments when I'm pretty sure a marathon's 26.2 or 26.3 miles.
Yep.
We're going to guess on that one. Where are we at now? What mile marker are we at in the term of a marathon of lead service line replacements? Have we started the race yet?
I would say that
are we still stretching?
We've started the race. I'd say we're like at mile marker 3. We're in warm up phase. We're not running yet.
Our knees aren't even hurting yet.
No.
Okay.
No, we are. I think the race started, whether you wanted it to start or not. We're going. So I wouldn't be hesitant to say that we haven't started the race, but we're still early on, and there's still a lot to come.
What decisions can utility superintendents, public works directors, city councils, what decisions do they have over the next 12 to 15 months that affect the next 5 years?
I'm going to sound like a broken record. If your village board or city council have not made a decision at this point in time on how they're paying for this, that is absolutely what needs to be front of mind. That sets the precedence for your entire program. It sets the stage on how you're going to organize your program. So are you looking to do a cost share program? Are you looking to pay 100%? If you're doing a cost share program, what does that look like? There's so many different pieces to that. So you need that buy-in from your elected officials, and then that effectively will paint kind of the rest of your program's lifetime. So that to me is front of mind.
Now, I can almost guarantee from people I've talked to, from communities I've talked to, and I'm sure you've talked to, people are starting to feel overwhelmed. I mean, not only do we have
totally
not only do we have lead service lines, we've got water main replacements, we've had terrible snows in Illinois. We've had snow in Florida. I
think Texas.
Yeah, Texas.
Obviously Wisconsin. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Wisconsin. We just know you were getting snow. But all of these communities are getting so much thrown at them, and then to throw lead service lines on top, and whether it's PFAS or any other regulations, what's a realistic path forward for a community who's just saying, I'm overwhelmed, what can I do? I just need to start working on it. Is it just as simple as go, start plugging away? What's that? What's your advice for them?
I don't envy any community right now. To your point, there's so many other needs in a community. The aging infrastructure alone is a demanding aspect for a town. I think I would say probably two different areas that I would encourage a community to focus. It's inventory, right? If you don't feel you've got a good handle on that, creating a game plan internally on how you're going to get to 2027 with reducing or hopefully eliminating unknowns. And if you don't know how to do that, reach out to your experts, reach out to, the consulting firms in the industry that can help you. And then that replacement plan, so often any sort of plan that's being mandated by the government is kind of a checkbox for communities. And I can respect that. You've got a lot of other demands. This is effectively your guidebook. And so putting the time and effort into what that plan looks like now that is going to impact you 5 years from now. If you don't have that plan figured out, it's going to be a painful start to, effectively 28. So that would be where I would focus my energy.
Now, and you've talked to communities all over the state, across Illinois, across Florida, across different communities. You've talked to people. You've been out there. Giving a presentation to an operator group, there has to be some optimism that you're seeing about communities that are pushing forward, some success stories, the group of operators pushing ahead. What does that look like in the industry to see? What's that optimism look like? What are some of those stories that you see out there going on?
I take lead out of the picture. I think what's shifted with these regulations is so often in our industry, we are communicating with residents because there's something wrong. And I'm not saying lead isn't wrong.
It's a water main break. It's a sewer backup. It's a tree down. It's a violation for not cutting your grass. That's the communication they've been used to,
Yeah.
what you're saying.
And these requirements, as painful as they are, as overwhelming as they are, as financially stressful as they are for a community, I've seen communities use this as an opportunity to engage with their residents in a way that we haven't done in so long. I'm seeing communities going to, different town hall events, maybe you've got a 4th of July event. I know the town I have, there's an entire week devoted to kind of, we call it Fiesta Days. Shout out to McHenry. There's just a different shift in terms of how operators are engaging with residents. And I think that allows our industry to maybe be painted less as a afterthought and more as a forethought for the country. And I love that. I think that's super cool.
And it's awesome to see that, when I got into the water industry, it was always, you were only getting yelled at, complained at. And to see that shift of, you're right, water is a super important resource. And it's, you look down during the recent cold snap in Texas and Florida, we heard about, water communities talking to their residents, getting information out there, running water doesn't freeze, how to help you. It's getting that good information out there and being good stewards of the water industry.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you for taking some time to come down and talk to us today. Give us an update, because this is a process. You mentioned we're at mile 3. So, getting going, and I guarantee
Having never run a marathon.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I guarantee we're going to bring you back and talk about where we're at, see where we're going. And this is one of those where you can't say, all right, I got my plan in place, go. There's going to be changes. There's going to be a lot of moving pieces. So thank you for coming down. We really appreciate it today.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Thanks. It's amazing to hear on a regulation of this size, we're at mile 3 on a marathon. We have so much to go, but it is heartwarming to hear how communities and utilities are changing the perspective of how residents are being communicated to. We're getting out there, we're getting ahead, we're talking to people. This is going to be a long process, but I know the water industry can accomplish it. For our entire team here at Baxter Women, like, subscribe, share, and have a great day.